Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on data protection and data privacy. So it is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we're ending it with a bang. My name is Chantel Mullings, and I am your host for this morning's event. For those of us with an interest in data protection and privacy, we're in for quite a treat this morning because we will be picking the minds of our three panelists who are all experts in their respective fields. We have an exciting morning planned for you all, and you'll want to keep your ears peeled for a giveaway at the end. So before we begin, I'd like to outline the structure of this morning's webinar. So first, I'll introduce our panelists. We will then engage in a discussion with the panelists through engaging with some pre-submitted questions, after which we'll open to a question and answer session in which you'll be able to use the raise hand feature to ask questions of all or any of our panelists. And then finally, we'll have the giveaway. Up for grabs is an Amazon gift card of value $100 US. So shall we get started? All right, so our first panelist should be a familiar name and face. He is Mr. Chukwuemeka Cameron, more commonly known as, if I may, Chuck Cameron. He is an experienced attorney at law with 21 years at the bar. He's also the founder of Design Privacy, which is a consultancy firm that helps companies comply with local and international privacy laws. Chuck has demonstrated history of working in regulatory compliance in the telecom and financial industry. He is skilled in privacy law, commercial law, and copyright law. As it regards educational qualifications, Chuck holds a master's in information technology and management from Erasmus University with focus on data protection. And in 2019, he completed an advanced masterclass training as a data protections officer in the UK. Welcome, Chuck. We're pleased to have you here with us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much. And welcome to the participants.
Thank you, Chuck. And our next panelist is Mr. Christian Nane. He has over 15 years of experience in information technology and security. Christian manages security programs as well as consulting and innovation of new generation products and services. He is currently the Director of Professional Services and Chief Information Securities Officer at CSAP. Prior to his work at CSAP, he worked as a security consultant at Verizon. With his experience in security programs, Christian and his team designed and implemented CSAP's cybersecurity program, which focuses on the need of Latin American organizations. Christian holds a Bachelor's of Computer Science from the University of California. Further, he has multiple globally recognized certifications, including ISC2, and he is a certified ethical hacker. Welcome, Christian. It's lovely having you with us this morning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
So our third and final panelist is Mr. Mario N.R. Sparks. He is the founder of the Optimity Group of companies, which consists of MS Tech Solutions, Purple Team, AI Tix, and Smart Living. He serves in the dual roles of CEO and CTO. Mario has over 15 years of experience in the IT and security industry, having worked for telecommunication giants such as Nortel Network as senior systems engineer with responsibility for the Caribbean, and then later transitioning to Avaya as the regional services manager of the Caribbean and Latin America. He also has numerous internationally recognized certifications, such as the Information System Security Professional, and he's also an ethical hacker. As it relates to educational qualifications, Mario is a proud graduate of the University of the West Indies, and he is now a PhD candidate at the Nova Southeastern University with specialization in information assurance and cybersecurity. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you, Chantel.
All right, so it's lovely having you all on board today, and I trust we will be having a good time. So we are in what is termed the digital age, and it seems that COVID-19 pandemic has catalyzed our experiences. So the relevance of data protection and privacy is even more so today than it was a couple of years ago. So we want to start with one of the pre-submitted questions, and this will be thrown out to all of you. Why is data protection and privacy important to you? Chuck, would you like to start for us?
Thank you very much. And that is a good starting place. It really flows from the fundamental right to informational privacy that was just recently declared in Jamaica through the NIDS decision. So privacy is not only, we don't get privacy from the legislation. It actually came out to the NIDS decision where the Chief Justice said that anybody or any entity that uses anyone's personal data without authorization more than likely is breaching their right to privacy. And the concept of privacy underlines the dignity of the human and is the actual enabler of all your other fundamental rights. So it does go to the heart of who we are as humans. So it is a critical question, and it's not just why it's important to protect data, but we're actually securing the dignity of the human.
Thank you, Chuck. As an attorney, I understand why you took the constitutional route, and now we're going to go to Mario. Would you like to answer next?
Yeah, thanks, Chantel. And welcome again to all the participants who have joined. Thanks, Chuck. I won't attempt to pronounce your entire name, and thanks, Christian. But jumping on to what Chuck mentioned, it should have been privacy and data protection should have really been at the forefront for a while. But of course, based on the fact that the regulators were not necessarily enforcing, things are very loose. And I'm very happy to see, of course, we have a long way to go. Security is a journey. Data privacy is it's as Chuck mentioned, it's all about our basic human rights. We should have the right to control what is put out there in the space and how it is used. And data privacy it's a governing concept, and the protection is really just a small process or piece of it. And I consider myself to be an ambassador because I myself pride myself in the privacy of my own information, privacy of the information of my clients, my employees. And I want to ensure that everyone, not just in Jamaica, but everyone across all countries understand the need and the seriousness of adhering to the rules around ensuring that their data is private.
Thank you, Mario. And Christian, would you like to speak with us?
Yes, thank you. Data privacy is one of the, like both Mario and Chuck has said, is one of the inherent rights that we get as human beings, as just for existing. And this goes to the fact that countries that don't have a legislation towards data privacy, and Guatemala is actually one of them. We actually in most of Central American countries don't have a legislation towards privacy. It becomes really hard for us to how we can actually protect ourselves from the information we have to actually give companies, because companies require us to give them information about ourselves just to, let's say, open a credit card, open a bank account that is very sensitive to us. Bank statements to open a credit card, where I live, my phone number, very detailed information about myself. And it is my fundamental right that, given that I gave that information willingly to give a product, they need to protect it in that way. And data privacy goes a lot more further than what a lot of people think, that it's just, okay, so they're not going to use my data for other means for what it was intended. It has to go deeper than that, and it has to be including protection controls towards the data to actually help us as individuals achieve privacy. Because, okay, let's suppose that the privacy legislation says you cannot use the data for anything other than what it was intended to. But if they're not protecting the information from within to begin with, and they have a data breach, our privacy is being affected. So it goes a lot more further than the intent that the information was given to the company or the organization with. It has to go further than that.
Thank you, Christian. Very interesting discussion. So we've all touched on privacy just being a wider issue and connected with our fundamental human rights protected by the Constitution. Christian, in particular, you touched on just the great importance that data protection holds today as separate from the wider privacy issue. With the rise in big data and just the mass mining of personal data, Christian, we'd love to know, why do you think that data protection is so much more important in recent times?
Data protection in recent times has been increasing in importance, specifically if we align it with the amount of data breaches that have been happening. Data breaches for our private information is one of the, let's say, one of the sensitive and one of the critical aspects that companies need to take care of, because even though it might not affect them as a company, if there's a data breach of PII directly as a company, other than reputational, maybe it affects their customers directly. And they are being the custodians of our data. So protection of the data, with the rise in amount of attacks that we have been seeing in the region and the world, and DBIR has been published for a lot of years, have actually shown how this has increased over the years and how important this is. And even different types of attacks have been changing over the course. Like ransomware at the beginning, yeah, it was just they ransom your information, they just kept it encrypted, and it just stayed that way. But everybody said, hey, I have backup. It didn't went to the backup, so I'm good. I just restored the backup, we're good. So now that actually evolved into having the attacker exfiltrate the information first, then encrypt your data and say, hey, you don't want to pay? Here you go. I'm going to publish this information. So these types of attacks have made data protection an even more important topic to consider within data protection, within information security as a whole.
Thank you, Christian. So it seems the Jamaican legislators have recently recognized the importance that data protection holds, because we have recently passed the Data Protection Act here. So I'll just go to Mario. And Mario, we'd love to ask, what kind of business was the Data Protection Act made for?
Right, so thanks, Chantel. So the Data Protection Act of 1988 was originally brought forward by the UK Parliament to protect the personal data that's stored on computers, and not just computers, but organized paper filing systems, right? So that's important for everybody to understand that. So it's not just the data that's stored within an actual system, but how a file structure is managed, right? Now, it fast forward 20 years to the Data Protection Act of 2018, which then enacted what we now know as GDPR. Now, GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, essentially governs the use, the collection, the storage, and the processing of data of all EU citizens. No, not because the company or a company is not within the EU or the EEA means that the GDPR does not apply. Once you are processing data from an EU citizen, whether it be they're within the EU or outside, you can be the ICO can actually enforce those fines and regulations on the company. So I mean, short answer to your question, I believe it applies to most companies now because of COVID, most companies are processing online. We're now in a very extensive global economy. EU citizens are everywhere. We sell services not just within Jamaica. Companies sell services not just within the US, not just within Canada, South America, right? We are cross borders. And because we are cross borders, we have to ensure that we adhere to the mother of all regulations, which is GDPR. So it was essentially intended originally for the EU, but based on the broad coverage of GDPR now, I would say it applies to all companies, or most at least.
Thank you, Mario. It is true that we are in the digital age and most companies are handling data, and given that a lot of our businesses are online and collecting this data online, and the GDPR does have extraterritorial application, as you mentioned. It's important for all companies to pay attention to this. It's interesting because the law usually tends to lag behind technological developments, and it has lagged for some time. But this is an important piece of legislation, important regulation, and one that requires much attention. So we're on the topic of legislation. So let's revert to Chuck. Chuck, what are the standards of processing of personal data, and what are the exemptions to these standards under the Data Protection Act? So
before I answer that specific question, just want to touch on this extraterritorial reach of the GDPR. What we have seen in terms of the actual application, it is very specific for companies outside of Europe that actually market to European citizens. So it's not, the application hasn't been as far-reaching as it's actually worded. So if it is a company has a website and, for example, it's in French and would accept payment in euros, that is where you are directly targeting a European citizen. If it is you just have a website in English for the world, it's not for the world because in a specific language and you have a specific currency and that sort of thing. So yes, it does have an extraterritorial reach, but the actual application of the laws we have seen where it is specific to companies targeting European citizens. When we speak about data processing standards, it really, and I'm segueing from what Christian said and what Mario said earlier, it's segueing from the fundamental principle or the fundamental concept from data protection. And in terms of context, the right to privacy really originated back in 1930 when you had the German government conducting their census, collected the information for government purposes, but then used it to hunt down Christians and migrants that led to the Holocaust. So the mischief there was here it is, you had a government collecting data en masse, but used it for an unlawful purpose. And there was nothing there that prevented the government from doing so. So that was an issue that they're trying to solve. And when we look at what happened in Jamaica, where the government was pushing the implementation of the NIST decision, we see where the opposition jumped in and said, hey, you can't be collecting all of this data without having adequate safeguards in place, and especially making it mandatory to do so. So in that context, there are certain data processing standards that flow. And I'm going to ask that you go around the table again, because I'm on my laptop and my low battery warning just came up. So I need to address that quickly.
Yes, Chuck, please do. We wouldn't want to lose you. So we'll go on, and the next question is for Mario and Christian. So the question is, do you know of any instances where companies have breached individual privacy rights, and what could they have done differently to prevent this from happening?
Oh my goodness, so many. Christian, where do we start? So the one that really jumped out at me is the Equifax breach, right? Where essentially all adults in the United States, their data was essentially leaked in the dark web, you know. I will speak specifically about Equifax because Equifax could have done something about it. The database that Equifax houses all the information for, you know, and Equifax manages your credit scores, right, in the US. It sits on what is called an Apache Strut server, right? No, Apache released a notification roughly 2 months before the breach, two and a half months before the breach. Equifax, based on, you know, investigations after the breach, it was found that nothing was actually done to address not just the notification from Apache and the IOCs, the indicators of compromise, and the necessary updates applied. They sat on it, and of course, you know, hackers realized the vulnerability and essentially penetrated their databases, and subsequently the information was put out on the dark web. No, it's you know, that incident caused, you know, numerous congressional hearings, you know, the structure within which how the data is managed within government organizations, not just the US, but other countries, based on the mass scale. Now, it wasn't the largest breach, but based on the fact that it was an agency that manages essentially all applications or all data PIIs for adults within the US, it caught some attention of the right people. So I would say that is that is one that jumped out at me, and I'll push to Christian, and you know, we can come back to another.
Thank you, Mario. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, talking about the data breaches, one of them that popped out to me that was interesting is hearing a giant like Microsoft have a data breach. Like in January 22nd last year, they had a big data breach in which they, for some reason, they left a database on the web unprotected. It was just weird having such a formal company have that type of mishap happen And if we look at the DBIR incident report for this year, which includes all the data for 2020, one of the things that is big is miscellaneous errors. And this is one of those types of miscellaneous errors that can actually cause a data breach. And during this data breach, it wasn't that big of PII data that wasn't disclosed, but there were disclosed IP addresses, email addresses, and support case details. So this is just, even though it was not intentionally that it was something like a very complex hack that happened, it was left unprotected for everyone to see. It wasn't an error. So in this case, given that it was an error, training would have been better, a better change management. This usually happens when there's a lot of things happening, like where they do some of shadow IT, where marketing decides, oh yeah, it would be nice to have this out, and IT and security never find out. So having those processes better audited with better controls would have been a way that it could prevent this.
Right, and just to jump on misconfiguration and just simple errors, because a lot of these breaches were not executed by sophisticated hackers, by Russians, by the Chinese, like for example, Uber. And Uber was essentially, that was a simple misconfiguration, credentials left on a popular site, GitHub, for coders. And if, as Christian mentioned, if there were effective processes put in place in terms of managing the changes and segmenting how that is done, that would have been easily avoided. And I'll take it home to Jamaica with the Jam COVID incident, right? I mean, everybody, it was not a sophisticated breach, but a simple, and everybody jumped on, the Amber connector, the Amber group, and of course it was embarrassing, but it was not a sophisticated hack. It was a simple case of, I closed the door, but I did not turn the key. You know what I mean? So, and these things can be avoided if the proper procedures are put in place to ensure that passwords are changed. There are multiple individuals who are able to access certain areas of a server, etc.
And just to add one last, one other data breach, and I find it interesting. This one, it has happened also last year in April 27th, and this is actually a callback that sometimes security won't actually be, even though the company is doing everything. This example that I'm going to give you guys shows that sometimes it is also our responsibility to make sure data privacy stays private, because one of the things users do a lot is that they reuse passwords all over the web. They love reusing passwords because, hey, it's easy. You remember one thing, you use it for everything, but it's not the best thing to do. So Nintendo had a data breach in which they used stolen credentials from other sources and used those credentials to actually go into the user accounts and do all sorts of different things, like doing digital purchases, buying store cards, and looking at the personal information of the users that were actually using the game consoles. So even though, like I said, this is not a huge breach because the impact was more related directly to the users and if they had balance in their accounts, but still, don't reuse passwords, please. if there's anything, use a password manager or something, but don't reuse passwords.
So if I may take it more from the European perspective, where we're looking at the decisions being handed down by the ICO, we would note, if you were to follow the decisions handed down, you would see that in the first 6 months of decisions being handed down, none of them really treated with technical measures. The first case, that was the first decision that comes to mind that was handed down, was a doorstep dispensary. and this was a pharmacy. And I read that case some time ago, but it was as simple as that they had boxes of medical records, well, not medical records, prescriptions sitting down, sitting down in their office. So it wasn't left outside, door wasn't open. It was just not in a controlled manner. And if you are to follow the cases, and given that this is what we do every day, we have to keep abreast with all the decisions being handed down, you would note that the greater focus at this stage, and we would anticipate in Jamaica that the ICOs at this stage are more concerned in ensuring you're implementing the organizational measures, because if it is, the board doesn't recognize this as a serious risk and then pass down that responsibility and put organizational controls in place. The fact is, you will always have data breaches, but it's really first, and you heard Christian speaking to it, the whole question of what it is the employee does in terms of reusing passwords. So what ICOs have done over the 2 years GDPR has been implemented is really looking at ensuring you first build out that organization framework, that ensuring you're having the training, and then now it moves into the technical standards that I fell down on before when my laptop power failed me. So some of those data processing standards are: the first thing, you must demonstrate a lawful basis for processing the data. That is not something that is arbitrary, that you can sit down and discuss and come up with a reason. No, the law actually states these are the lawful bases. If you do not fall within one of these lawful bases, you have no right to be processing data in at all. So it is something very specific that is prescribed. The second part of that first standard is that it must be lawful and fair. So fair has well, from the GDPR point of view, that they're really speaking to transparency. When our legislation speaks to fair, it has two components. One, you must satisfy yourself that you got it fairly, in terms of you did due diligence on how you came into that, but having come into possession of that information, you have a duty to notify your data subjects of the fact of processing and how you're processing. And again, it is not arbitrary. The legislation actually sets out the specific things that you must notify the data subjects of. So very often, we actually conducted a survey of all of the privacy policies of companies on the stock exchange. And of the 40 companies we looked at, only 2 of them would have had a privacy policy that would have conformed or met with the requirements or serve as a privacy notice, because the legislation is very specific in what you must say. It says A, B, C, D, and there are 7 other data processing standards. And I don't know if you'd want me to go through these 7 data processing standards, because this is more a panel discussion as opposed to a presentation. But if you do, just let me know and I'll be glad to.
Chuck, we'd love for you to give us a brief overview of the standards.
Okay, so the second data processing standard is that you must only, the reason for processing must be specific. So you can't collect data to onboard an employee, for example, and then use that data and sell it to, well, say for example, an association collects membership data and you keep a register because you need to know your members, and then you have a company like a company wanting to sell services to your members, so you give them their email addresses. No, you never receive the personal data for that purpose, and you cannot. Even if you have a group of companies and one company receives the information for the specific purpose for A, it cannot be used for B. So it must be for a specific stated purpose. The other thing is that you must only collect the information that is necessary and no more. So for the purposes of this conversation, well, we didn't have to sign up for anything, but if you had a form and wanted our first name and last name, you have to satisfy yourself and justify, why do you need both my first name and second name? If I'm a financial institution or any institution, I'm trying to get a reference, you are requiring the data subject to provide a reference. Okay, why do I need the address of the reference? Why do I need the occupation of the reference? Every single data item that you collect, you must justify why, because you should only collect the amount that is necessary. The converse works. If it is, you must have the first name and the last name, but you don't collect the last name to do what is necessary, you would be in breach as well. Other data processing standard is that it must be accurate, and you must maintain that information in an accurate manner. And when you look at the medical services, we understand how important that is. You must enable the data subject rights. And so you need to know what data subject rights are and ensure that you have processes in place to allow data subjects to enforce those rights. And moving into the whole IT issue and space now, the 7th data processing standard, you must have the technical and organizational measures in place. The legislation goes further, and for the first time, so, well, Christian would love to get things like this in Guatemala, but right now, Purple Team would focus on the fact that the law says that you must have vulnerability testing. You must encrypt your data. It actually prescribes certain technical measures that you must put in place. However, it is a risk-based approach. So everything is subject to the type of data you're processing, the size of your budget, and the availability of technology that's available to you. But there are certain technical measures that you must have in place. And finally, there are the restrictions on third-party transfers. So that's a very high-level overview of what the data processing standards are, bearing in mind that when you go back to 1A, lawful processing, there are at least 6 specific lawful bases that you have to rely upon that I did not seek to mention here.
Thank you, Chuck. Are there any exceptions that you could make us aware of?
So yes, there are. So from the security perspective, the Minister of National Security perspective, they are exempt from, understandably so, the first data processing standard, where you don't have to notify persons of the fact that they are being investigated. So once you have collecting data on a person of interest, they are exempt from notifying that person. There are also exemptions for scientific and research purposes. But even before what we say what those exemptions are, there is no broad brush exemption, none whatsoever. And I say for maybe the tax admin, and I have to look at, say for me, tax admin. But what an exemption is, first, you have to comply with all the data processing standards, and then demonstrate that you can benefit from this exemption. So there is no, so if it's a church, if I can give you a case out of Italy, where a nursery put a list of their students on the door, and they were charged for unlawfully processing data. So there are exemptions in terms of specific categories of processing, but there's no exemption in Jamaica in terms of size of company. When you look at the CCPA, there are financial thresholds and other thresholds, but it cuts across the board in Jamaica.
Thank you, Chuck. I feel like we've just gotten a very comprehensive view of the legislation, its exemptions, and how it operates. So I'd love to revert to Mario and Christian in light of what Chuck has discussed and otherwise. How can customers demand that their privacy rights, their data protection rights, aren't being breached?
So it's very it's very difficult for Mario Sparks as an individual to go to, say, a T-Mobile and say, you need to ensure that you are complying with XYZ, right? It's extremely difficult. That's why now the GDPR requires that you have a data protection officer, which Christian will speak about. As consumers, as citizens, we have to almost automatically assume that our data is on the dark web, right? We have to assume that it's out there somewhere. We input our emails on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, on the different social platforms. So because it is difficult, it is challenging for us to demand that these companies adhere. What I believe we can do as consumers is to ensure that, one, we take the necessary precautions in terms of protecting our own data, or rather limiting what we allow these bodies to collect on us. No, I'll speak on a breach that happened with T-Mobile, and this is something that I believe we can do as individuals. Now, the breach caused, I think it was over 500 million PIIs to be released on the dark web, and they were put on what is called paste bins. Paste bins are spaces within in the dark web that hackers literally just dump information. It's kind of like a notepad for the dark web, right? Now, how they were able to do that, some smart aleck called T-Mobile and essentially spoofed and essentially allowed or impersonated a user and got their number to be applied to a new SIM card, right, by giving the right IMEI number. And in order, what they were able to do is then authenticate based on text messaging, right? So, you have what is called two-factor or multi-factor authentication, where you sign in and then the customer or the service sends you a text. Now, I'm not a lover of text authentication because of that reason. What I believe in is using an app, a two-factor authentication app that essentially gives you another layer of security in terms of what you in terms of protecting the privacy of your data, right? Another thing I believe we can do is, if it is that we believe we have been breached, report the incident, right? Report the incident, because I always say if there are no consequences, it will essentially perpetuate, right? So if it is that we're reporting the incidents to the IOC, we're reporting the incident to the necessary supervising authorities that enforce the GDPR, and we are also forcing our legislation, forcing the governments, forcing the parliament to put forward stricter measures that will put us in a much better position to put pressure on these companies in order to ensure that our data is not leaked.
Thank you, Mario and Christian.
If I may,
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah,
right. So the legislation was very clear in what rights the data subjects have and how they can enforce them. And it's even more, it's stronger than employment law or labor law when you see how it has been used across Europe. The first thing you can do is pick up the phone, any of your service providers, and say, tell me all the data you are processing on my behalf. Tell me. And you have 30 days to do so. this, and then after you do, and if they fail to do so, that is a breach, and they can go to jail if they fail to provide you with that information within 30 days. You can then demand them to give you the information that they have on you. And all the data subject rights are enforceable. And so the biggest thing is awareness of those data subject rights, because as Mario had started by saying, he can't go to T-Mobile and tell them or enforce anything, but all he has to do is pick up the phone and make a complaint to the Information Commission and say, I made a request for my information two months ago, and I followed up and I didn't get a response. And the Information Commissioner has the power, not in response to this request, but he has the ultimate power to lock down your business. He can tell you, stop processing personal data. So the data subject is the most powerful person in this scenario today. And I'm very happy about that, because now every business owner is in the same position as an attorney. And why I say that is that attorneys have a fiduciary duty to their clients, and attorneys are known for enforcing those code of ethics. So every day you'd hear an attorney being struck off. No, because you are a custodian of your client's data, if it is you can't account to them, one employee, as to how you are using their data, your business can come to an end. So the data subject has been significantly empowered.
Chuck, you mentioned Europe. Could you just clarify for us whether this power held by data subjects is the same in Jamaica?
No, man, I was speaking about the first data subject right that has been afforded to Jamaican citizens. So you can pick up any, as of December 1, when the legislation will be gazetted, that has been pronounced in Parliament, you can pick up the phone and ask, please tell me all the data that you are processing on my behalf. So these are rights afforded to Jamaican citizens. You can tell them, stop processing my data, and they have to stop processing my data. Well, dependent on the lawful basis that they were using. If it was consent or for marketing purposes, you can tell them, stop processing my data, please. And they have to do it. So the citizen here, the data subject here, would be the greatest enforcer of the data subject rights. So forget about the ICO, forget about this data protection officer. It is the data subject. And remember, the reason why it is so, and that is why I started with the Constitution, we are talking about their constitutional rights. And what has happened is that the legislatures have given the citizen the power to enforce those rights over a private company, as opposed to before now, it was a constitutional right really protected the citizen from the government. But now the legislation has given the power to the citizen to enforce those rights to the biggest company in the world.
Right, and jumping on what Chuck said in terms of the power being in the hands of the consumer, what a lot of people don't realize, so especially when you are submitting data for marketing or a document, if you look on the spread where it asks you for your name, possibly your occupation, your email address, it's no longer enough for them to accept just that information. You have to, there is what's called a double opt-in. So you have to complete the form, as well as you have to select check boxes below. Now, if the form simply has fields to enter your name, your occupation, etc., and those boxes aren't there, you can report that as well. So that is a sort of a proactive approach, as opposed to going and saying, let me know what you have collected. You are for understanding your rights and understanding the policies and the procedures, you as the consumer can then say, this is wrong. and report, either if you feel like, report it to the company and say, hey, this needs to be changed, or you can take it to the supervising authority, because if it is that they are collecting data without the double opt-in method, that is illegal.
Changing gears a little bit on what a user can actually do regarding data privacy is Mario touched on a very good point on two-factor authentication. However, I wanted to touch point in the fact that we need to be very, very self-aware of what we are actually posting in any social media. I know there are some Instagram fellows that just love to post anything on Instagram, like what their food is, where they are, what they're doing, anything. And just be aware that you are posting that there. That won't be covered under privacy necessarily, because you are exposing that information. You are giving that information to the public. Of course, the company still has to protect that information in a certain way, but it is up to you how restricted your profiles currently are. So I'm not a fan of social media. If you actually anybody goes into my social media profiles, they're very thin, for lack of a better word. But that's just because I don't like to be posting everything I do and everybody knowing about it. So keep that in mind, because what we post on social media can be the cause of a future breach to our privacy, of our email, of our other social media, of bank accounts and stuff like that. Because what do we usually get from a bank?
12 hours.
Great question. What?
No, sorry, Christian. That was my computer telling me the time. Sorry.
Oh, I was like, what? I don't know what just happened there. So what I was saying is, like, they usually ask us for these security questions, and these usually security questions are about ourselves. And if we're posting our lives in the internet, and they tell us, okay, what was the name? Where did you live when you were a kid? And we posted our entire life in social media. It's very, very easy to find that out. So make sure your privacy filters within social media are set accordingly to your needs, to make sure you're only displaying publicly what you want to display publicly, because otherwise that is the perfect mix for a future data breach to happen, not to an organization, but to you, and a breach of privacy to yourself. And one last thing I wanted to take note on this is that doing an attack, people think that to do a ransomware attack or to do a breach is an extremely sophisticated thing you need to do. Please keep in mind that in the dark web, if you know how to access the dark web, you can actually find places like what used to be the Silk Road, where, yeah, of course, they sell all types of things, including any type of drug you could imagine. Like I went to the talk where the FBI was talking about this, and it was just impressive the amount of things they found out. But you can actually buy hacking as a service, ransomware as a service. The hackers are doing that. It's like, hey, I don't really need to hack anybody right now. I don't have a target in mind. Let me sell you the service and I'll hack them for you. You pay me and you reap the benefits. So I need the audience to keep that in mind, that actually exists, because it is a big thing.
Right, and I mean, excellent points, Christian. And I mean, jumping on what you mentioned about ensuring or the data we put out there is secure. A lot of us believe our data isn't important. You know, I have nothing to hide. I have nothing that's valuable. But remember, many times you are the access point to a potential target, right? So, for example, if a CEO, you know, is the target, they may try to infiltrate his assistant or a secretary or somebody who then they can then impersonate and send emails. So not because you are not a person of interest means that you should be careless with your data and careless with how you put forward information on the web, right? So it's and to Christian's point about, you know, ransomware as a service or you know, hackers as a service, it's a real thing. And in some spaces of the dark web and some forums, you actually have what they called people's court in the dark web. So if you, and this is quite funny, if you hire a hacker to say, you know what, this person, by the way, it is illegal to hack back in the US. So if you are hacked, it is illegal to hack back. Just to put that out there, right? So it is not said that, you know, we encourage this, but it is illegal to hack back. But if you hire, and just to show you the magnitude of the situation, hire a hacker on the dark web and they take your money and it's not the hack isn't fulfilled, you can actually report the hacker, right? And there is a court system on the dark web that will prosecute that hacker for not delivering the services that you have purchased, right? So it's it's called the People's Court, and so they say there is no honor among thieves, but on the dark web there is, right? So just it's a serious space, and you know, I think everyone needs to understand the gravity of what is now available. I don't need to go there and get, you know, certified anymore. It's you know, it's you know, hacker for hire.
And forget about just certifications. I don't even need to know coding at all. I don't even need to know about computer systems. I just need to know my target. That's all I really need to know, and how to access the dark web. So it really just becomes like that hitman almost.
Anyway, sorry, Chantel. I Christian and I could go on and on and on about this, you know. So I know we have a time, you know. So yeah, let's move ahead.
It's been really interesting, and I'm checking the Q&A to see if anyone has asked about the dark web, because it would be interesting to engage in more of a discussion about that, because of the ease of access to the dark web. But we're gonna continue, and then we'll see how much time we have left, so we can revert to you and Christian. Our final question before the Q&A session is to Chuck. Chuck, could you explain for us the consequences of breaching the DPA? I know that you touched on it a bit earlier, but could you give us a more comprehensive view of the consequences of breach?
Okay, so as a precursor to the consequence, let me explain what some of your obligations are. So the first thing that you have to do is to register with the Information Commissioner. Registering with the Information Commissioner at the appointed time would take you at least 12 months to put yourself in a position to register. If you do not register, you can be faced with a fine of up to, I believe it's $1 million or $2 million, and a jail term. So in these circumstances, there is no data breach. You have just failed to comply. You have failed to get on his register. So that's the first thing you must do. You also have an obligation to observe all the data processing standards. So when we look at how the GDPR, the information commissioners across Europe have weighed in on it. So there's a maximum of 4% of your gross annual profit that you can be exposed to. But the question is, okay, so when am I really exposed to that? The information commissioners have placed heavy weather on you failing to observe the data subject rights, because remember, that is akin to well, it is a constitutional right, and the data processing standards are enablers. So when we talk about those fundamental breaches of any one of those data processing standards or data subject rights, that's when you can be exposed to that a portion of or that 4%. The Information Commissioner, as I indicated, has the ability to tell you to stop processing data. And that is one that I've not heard made heavy weather of. But if any individual, this is not a court, this is not an arbitrator, this is somebody who can initiate an investigation on his own. He can then assess the facts himself and then give you a directive to stop processing data until you have put the requisite controls in place. So for me, that is one of the most devastating and high risk powers that he has to exercise that we must be mindful of. Other sanctions that are available to him is just, well, he has the power to conduct and request information. If you fail to deliver information, he can then has the power to conduct a search after having gone through the requisite due process. So his powers are far reaching. So the sanctions, the sanctions are used to let people understand that this is important, and we will be making examples of big companies and that sort of thing. But on a day-to-day basis, what I want us to concern ourselves with is the power he has on your day-to-day operations and how it can impact negatively on your day-to-day operations and actually stop your day-to-day operations.
Thank you, Chuck. So we've had a really interesting discussion on data protection and privacy. I'd love to ask Mario and Christian, do you have anything that you'd like to add before we go to the question and answer segment?
Sorry, no, Shanta, you can go ahead. I'm not sure.
Not on my side as well.
Okay, great. So we've gotten a lot of information this morning, and we've also come away with some consumer tips like use app authentication, be careful with social media posts, change those passwords, and I like to add, stop accepting all cookies. Now we're gonna go on to the question and answer segment. So we see that Chuck has been answering some of the questions. Thank you, Chuck. And then we have 3 open questions. So let's start. Jermaine Bryan has asked, how will data privacy priorities likely shift in the year ahead?
I can answer this question. A worldwide perspective, let's say, as people, let's turn it into people, because legislators at the end are people. Start noticing that the requirements for data privacy is an actual need. New legislations will arise that will enforce data privacy for organizations to make sure that they are protecting your data the way they're supposed to protect it. Unfortunately, in some cases, this doesn't happen till one of those legislators actually gets affected by a data breach, and or somebody close to them, because let's get real, and this is real for most of security. Security never has a budget until data breach happens or an incident happens, and then suddenly magically they have budget for everything. Same thing happens with legislations. Until something actually happens, unfortunately, legislations will start to appear and be more stringent.
Unless it's gun control in the US, for sure.
What?
Unless it's gun control in the US.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into that one. That is a discussion with the Constitution. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that one. the reason with gun control, that's a different topic altogether.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, that's a different topic altogether. So we will be shifting towards more stringent controls towards privacy as the year goes on. Maybe not this year, but next year. More stringent controls towards privacy will start to appear, and organizations will be needing to make sure they comply with those standards. First is the legislation, then probably is going to be data breach notifications, and things will go like things the US already has in place regarding data privacy and the EU has in place as well, will be becoming the norm in most places.
Yeah, and of course, you know, there's the California Act, the CCPA. There's a PIPEDA that is being enforced by Canada, and all states across the United States are pushing bills forward in order to have those acts and those legislations passed. And I mean, I have to thank Chuck because I wasn't aware that there's an act to be passed on the 1st of December. So, you know, there is obviously a shift, and the powers that we are, you know, understanding more, you know, the gravity of ensuring that these companies are held to the fire.
On the global level, we see where the regulators are now more, they're a bit ahead of us. We see where they're more concerned about AI and how do we build in privacy in AI and machine learning. So that's a big international consideration. Locally, it is hoped that from a government perspective, we see that there would be some sort of educational awareness program around the legislation, because it is going to be a cry of too little, too late when corporate companies start understanding that there is a Data Protection Act, and they start understanding of the undertaking that they have to now deal with. Because our experience has been that when companies finally start to engage in it, the question is, okay, so how can we lobby the government? This is ridiculous. This can't happen in 2 years. So I hope from a local perspective, we can be talking about privacy and AI and all of those nice things. It is just really about public awareness. So webinars such as these are very, 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 very important in terms of public awareness, because you're not going to get any change in the marketplace if people are not even aware of the fact that there now must be change.
Thank you, Christian, Mario, and Chuck. We're gonna go on to the next question. Christian, NIST password guidelines speak about removing periodic password changes. Do you support or would you implement this in your organization?
Okay, I have mixed feelings really about this, because everybody has taught us that we should do our password rotation. But I really understand where NIST comes from with this. Password rotation has been an issue because if we are, let's say, having our users rotate passwords every 30 days, the complexity of passwords really is affected, because they need to have this password that they remember, that they're going to use constantly. And of course, the company says it needs to be complex. So I understand where they're coming from. However, I don't really support it completely, but I do support it in certain aspects. Public-facing applications where there's going to be a high number of users, removing password expiration would help. However, for critical things, password expiration should still happen. However, this also goes in saying we lax on complexity requirements, the complexity available to the user. And with this specific aspect, I completely agree with it. Because once we start constraining our users to a set of complexity, the exact complexity, the attacker already knows that the password needs to have this, 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 and that. Let's say upper characters, lower characters, special characters, and a size. It needs to have all of those elements and numbers. It needs to have all of those elements. However, if we lack the actual requirements of the password, the attacker doesn't know what it actually needs to have. So therefore, making it at a sense more difficult to actually break those passwords. Going back to the actual periodicity of changing passwords, the best thing to do, and if you have something implemented like this, like a single, like a one-time password solution, or I don't like SMS, but it's better than nothing, or an app that sends you push notifications to log in, removing password expiration is totally valid, as long as they have a complex enough password. Because at that point, you already have a two-factor authentication that will force the user not only to have the password, but to have another device such as either biometrics or a phone or a token to actually do the authentication process. And I believe one of the NIST guidelines is it doesn't set to implement, but to consider two-factor authentication as part of authentication. So if we consider that as part of the actual recommendation, removing periodicity is okay. It's not a big deal at this point.
Right, and
factor authentication.
Absolutely, Christian, and just to add a little bit to what Christian just said, the guideline also went on to encourage the use of a password managers within organizations, because what research has shown, Betty, who is the receptionist, she will have a password that is the name of our cat. That's probably 8 characters long, but she continues to change. So as opposed to alpha, she then changes the A from an uppercase to lowercase, and then the next change will be an @ sign, and then the L will be lowercase. So it's the same permutation of the password, right? And that's what research has shown. So therefore, they're saying, periodic changes make no sense if they're changing it to the same thing, right? So how do you remove that from, because no one is going to, I mean, you would think they would try and come up with that complex, but they will make it simple and easy for them to remember, which is it's understandable. But implementing corporate password managers is also a recommendation if it is that you are removing periodic password changes coupled with multi-factor or two-factor authentication. Hope that makes sense.
One thing, so if you're going to implement password rotation, one thing to implement to actually prevent that is to make sure both, once you compare the first and the second password, that they have a high entropy. By high entropy, I mean that they are very, very different. This is going to frustrate your users, let me tell you. At first, when we implemented that, it just messed with my head. I tried to it's completely different. Why isn't it still not accepting it? Oh yeah, because it had 3 letters in the same place. What? 3 letters in the same place and you're still canceling it? So one of the things I recommend is where a password manager is not viable, such as, let's say, logging into your computer. Using a password manager at that point is going to be very difficult. You're going to open, let's say, LastPass on your phone, and you're going to get a password that is 15 characters long that you cannot even type fast because it's random characters, random places where caps goes in, random places where numbers goes in. It's just going to be random. So it's not viable. And what I recommend here is to use passphrases rather than passwords. And here it's something that I've been doing a small experiment. It's a psychological experiment. There's a psychology behind repeating things to yourself constantly, and actually making your brain geared towards that. So if you have a thing you have to change every 60, 90 days, use that passphrase that actually means something to you. Let's say, I'm going to study more on cybersecurity. It's a very complex password. It has more than 15 characters. It has special characters. It has caps. It has lowercase. Maybe it doesn't have numbers, but it's going to be complex enough and it's going to be big enough for it not to be able to be cracked easily. And additionally, by repeating that same sentence over and over, even if you're just typing it, if you try to just concentrate and believing on what you're actually doing, it is actually going to gear you towards that. There's a book called Psychocybernetics that actually talks like that our brain actually works like a missile guidance control for a missile. So I'm just using that principle to my passwords as for now. So it's something that I'm trying. It has given me positive results actually. So my passwords are now very, very long. It's very hard for me to forget them. People look at me when I type passwords like, really? It's that long? How do you remember that? It's a sentence at the end of the day. It's a simple sentence. And it means something to me. So it's an interesting tip that I use.
Thank you, Christian, for this insight. We do have another question. Khadija, I see your question, but in the interest of time, we're going to have someone from the Purple team email the answer to you. At this time, we'll get to the giveaway. So I hope everyone has been listening. You'll answer by using the raise hand feature. And remember, up for grabs is an Amazon gift card of value $100 US. Okay, so the question is, what are the consequences of non-compliance with the Data Protection Act? No, Chuck, you cannot answer. I'm sorry. Do we have any hands raised? Let's see. Khadija. Khadija, you're muted.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, is it $1 to $2 million fine and jail time?
Let's see, Chuck. Is that correct? Chuck, you're muted.
So because there are numerous, I think that general approach is the best approach because I think that's sufficiently correct.
Okay, so Khadija, it seems you're our winner today, Khadija. A representative from the Purple team will be contacting you to get your information so that you can get that Amazon gift card. Congratulations. Thank you for joining us and thank you for listening, Khadija.
Thank you.
Woo! Okay, thank you all for joining us today at the end of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I trust that you leave feeling a lot more powerful and well, I pray that you'll be using some of the tips that have been shared. A lot have been shared by Mario, by Christian, and Chuck has informed us a lot about the Data Protection Act and the GDPR. So, well, we've come to the end. Thank you once again. Thank you, our panelists. It's been such an interesting discussion. Thank you all for joining us.